From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I am your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun next to me as he does each and every podcast, Andre Johnson Jr. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, and review. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And we've got a great show today because we had a very busy weekend in the sports world in the city of New Orleans. Of course, the NFL draft. Before we get to that, Andre, how was your weekend this weekend? Did you have a full weekend or kind of a short weekend?
It was a shortened weekend. You know, last week was the old 6-day work week because...
Mine as well.
Yeah, we certainly weren't hurting for content between the Zurich, the Pelicans in the playoffs, and the NFL draft. It was a busy weekend here at Fox 8.
No doubt about it. I thought I was going to get done Saturday about 7. 9 o'clock rolls around. I'm still here. I'm like, my goodness, it just kept going and going and going and going. It was a long weekend, and I was, start to finish covering the NFL draft, the Saints draft. I was out at Saints draft headquarters all 3 days. And obviously, this being the Saints podcast, it's where we're going to go here today. But, shout out to the Zurich Classic. It was phenomenal when it came to the crowds, the weather, and, of course, the champion and the champion's moment singing Journey after the tournament was an awesome event. And we'll see what happens with the Pelicans here tonight. By the time you watch this podcast, you may or may not already know. But for today's big picture, where else could we go? We got to go 2024 Saints draft. Their draft class is now complete. 7 players added to the Saints roster. First round, second round, 3 fifth-rounders, a 6th-rounder, and a 7th-rounder. So why don't we start?
Big picture has to be, you mentioned all the draft picks. We know how the board has settled out at this point. Mm-hmm. We got to talk about what we love, what we hate, what was the most intriguing. But we're going to start with the glass half full. Mm-hmm. What did you love about the Saints draft this season?
Absolutely. I love the start. You tackle the future. I think high end, ceiling-wise, you got a guy in Talise Fuanga that you could get in here. He starts day one, which is crucial. He's got a lot of experience. Knock on wood, he's been healthy. He's got great athleticism combined with fluidity, combined with a natural aggression that you don't normally see. It's normally one or the other. Right. You see an athletic, fluid guy or an aggressive, physical guy. He's got a little bit of both. At the worst, he's a day one starter and a steady guy up front along your offensive line. I love the fact that the Saints didn't overthink it. The pick came up. He was available. I know they thought about trading back, but nonetheless, they were able to pull the trigger and get Talise Fuanga. And look, I probably sold him a little bit short in the pre-draft process. He was on all our lists. Right. He was in our sort of cluster of players at the position available at 14 that we would certainly consider. But of the guys, I probably sold him a little bit short because after they selected him, went back and watched a few more tapes on him. And like I said, he's a guy that he just came across with the size and the style. The clips that I saw at the Senior Bowl, he was really mauling guys. And I was like, well, man, maybe he's more of a gap scheme kind of guy, and maybe he's more of a bigger mauling type as opposed to a leaner, stretch boot, wide zone type guy. But no, he ran a ton of the wide zone at Oregon State. He's a guy that got to the second level a lot, blocked off linebackers and corners and safeties and all that stuff, while also moving guys off the line of scrimmage and not allowing sacks in the passing game. So he played in reverse. He played going forward. He is a very solid, safe, steady selection. I got all the S words there down for the Saints at 14. And look, you needed that. You kind of stabilized your biggest fear up front. You didn't completely solve the problem, but you stabilized it enough to where it's not a, oh my God, what the heck are we going to do up front at the offensive line? You at least have one spot you can trust is covered, despite the fact that he's never played a snap. And look, the other thing I love is simply this, and I'm going to give DA credit for this. And you probably haven't thought about this because of everyone's perceptions of DA, but start to hone in on specifics. When DA believes in a DB, that DB usually works out. So the fact that he targeted Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama, 5'11.5", about 200 pounds, press man, cornerback, they went up from 45 to 41 to get him. Usually when he has conviction on a defensive back, that defensive back ends up working out. Just look at the track record from Lattimore, from Adebo, from Jordan Howden. So now you obviously got Kool-Aid McKinstry in the building. Now, I know I said Lattimore. Will he be here? Will he not? I don't know. I refreshed myself on the topic in terms of just the new contract that he adjusted, the restructure that he had. It is structured in a way where post June 1st is probably when a trade would happen, should it happen, and obviously it would involve either next year's draft picks or some kind of player this year. But at most, I think Lattimore is probably here for one more year, and then at some point the organization moves on. But this at least gives you option at the position. And even if there is no plans to trade Lattimore, which I still think it's on the table, McKinstry still gives you depth at the cornerback room and probably makes the cornerback room the best position on the entire team. And like DA said, the fact of the matter is this: Lattimore's been hurt a lot. So you get down to your 4th, 5th, and 6th corners in the NFL. They did it last year, and this is a second-round pick where a lot of people had him graded. I went and checked the grades before we came on here today. One graded him at 24, had another one at 29, another one at 33. So you're talking about a late first, early second-round pick, and they got him at 41, which is kind of that early middle of the second round, if you will. So all in all, I like the first 2 picks because I think at some point both those guys contribute very quickly for the Saints.
I also wrote down the first 2 picks. The first pick, I got to give him an A on it. Taliese Fuanga, he addresses a need. We came into the draft saying that offensive tackle was the number 1 need. You needed to go OT if you're the Saints in the first round. And they had their number 1 defensive player fall to them, but they stuck to their guns. They went with that offensive tackle. I like that he's someone who's not afraid to move to left tackle because we mentioned he played right tackle his entire collegiate career. But when we talked to him in that Zoom after the draft, he said to him, some people act like it's like, driving on 2 different sides of the street. To him, you're doing the same thing on the left as you are the right. You just flip it over. He says he's been taking a lot of reps at left tackle throughout the offseason, and he's excited for a potential challenge if he is asked to move to left tackle. I like that he can give you that versatility. And like you mentioned, the dude's a baller. 0 sacks in 2 seasons.
And I played a lot of football, man.
Yeah. So I like Fuanga a lot with the first round pick. I love Fuanga. I liked Kool-Aid McKinstry, but I could love Kool-Aid McKinstry. You mentioned the possibility of them trading Marshawn Lattimore. If that's the Saints' end goal, is moving Lattimore, I think McKinstry is a great pick because he is a really, really good player. Now, if you decide to keep Lattimore, then I was scratching my head a little bit when the Saints traded up because
there were some other players there at that point, too.
I thought if they were going DB in the draft, it would be a safety.
Yeah.
Now, you draft a cornerback in your cornerback room. You mentioned it being one of the strongest on the team. I think it already is.
Yeah.
You got Lattimore. You've got a Debo, who was one of the 3 best defenders on the team last year. You've got Alontae Taylor, a guy who has given them solid football over the last 2 years. Now you throw Kool-Aid in there, and I'm like, with the room as it's currently constructed, whose job is he taking? Is he going to sit and learn right now? Can he possibly beat out a Debo? Can he be your nickel corner maybe? Is that something I don't think that's something he got to do much in college. So where Kool-Aid fits into this room as it currently is constructed, I'm not quite sure. That's why I was surprised to see them go corner. But if you move Lattimore, trading up and getting a guy with his talent, it's a great move.
I think they felt like this was a value pick, a guy they didn't think was going to be there at 41. Clearly, they kind of put a target on him and said, that's the guy we like if that was available. And I think he's a guy that gets on the field even if Lattimore is here and healthy because they do run a lot of dime stuff. They do run a lot of that third down package that they run, so it's a lot of 6 DB, so he can get on the field in that way. They had a track record when it comes to unfortunate injuries in the secondary, and they've also had a track record of overcoming those injuries because of players like this. They seem to have available, ready to go. And back in 2022, it was Alontae Taylor had to step up as a rookie, and he played well. Last year it was Ike Yadam. So they have a history of this, and I understand the philosophy, even if they don't go with Lattimore. But look, we're not fools here. We're not going to sit here and say, they're definitely not trading Marshawn Lattimore. They said as much. But look, that's still very much an option. Let's not kid ourselves here. That's still very much an option. If they can get valuable compensation for Lattimore, even at post-draft, which I didn't like going in because I wanted something present. But if they do it now and it's something, a decent value from what we've discussed in many podcasts before, run that 3rd or 2nd round value, then maybe it would be worth it, provided Kool-Aid, McKinstry can, develop into the player that they like. But look, there's also a little bit of risk there because he would still be a rookie at that point, and there is going to be a learning curve, and you're going up against way more talented quarterbacks this year than you had a season ago. So there's a little bit of risk there as well, where it could just be a situation where, you know what, we just going to make our cornerback room a loaded cornerback room. But as for the Fuanga, like I said, you went into the draft with basically 3 question marks on the offensive line. Now you at least have one less.
Yeah.
So to me, that can't be anything but an A, and probably an A+, because as many have said, there wasn't probably a team in the draft with a bigger need than the Saints had at the tackle position, probably 2 going into this draft. So I agree with you. That's probably an A+ pick as well.
Right, and you mentioned it about the Kool-Aid pick. He's a guy that was on their board that was falling, and they felt like they had to go up and get him, even though he doesn't necessarily fit a need. And we'll get into that later in the podcast. I think that was kind of the theme for the Saints in their first few
Always
picks.
is, yeah.
Is necessary. Now, they addressed their biggest need in round 1, but their next 2 picks, and we're about to get into that, they didn't need them. You didn't need a corner. And as we get into what the both of us probably found most intriguing, a lot of Saints fans probably surprised by, with their first pick in the 5th round, they went quarterback. They drafted Spencer Rattler, another position you didn't need because now, if you include Taysom, you've got 6 guys in that quarterback room. But a lot of people are sold on Spencer Rattler's talent. What did you see in Rattler?
Well, first off, let's separate the pick from the prospect.
Right.
Okay, let's the where they selected him versus the actual player. I have absolutely zero problem, none whatsoever, with this being the pick, because I went back and checked 6 or 7 different publications that rank prospects. The absolute lowest I saw Spencer Rattler was Daniel Jeremiah of NFL.com had him at 89. They got this guy at pick 150.
That would be the 3rd round.
3rd round, right. They got this guy at 150. So value. Now, they didn't need a quarterback. The quarterback room is certainly loaded now. It won't be loaded in a couple of months. I can promise you that. 1 or 2 of those guys are going to be gone after OTAs, maybe before. It's not hard to figure out who. I mean, Dennis Allen went out of his way to say it's going to be a nice battle between Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener for that backup quarterback. So he said it in the press conference. He basically called it out. So look, the other 2 guys, we'll see what happens. But intrigue is the perfect word when I watch this guy, because when this happens, I love watching tape, and especially when it comes to a quarterback. I mean, and there's a ton of tape on him out there because he's really been in the limelight for quite some time. But the QB1 stuff, by the way, the QB1 stuff, Saints couldn't care less about that because it was a 16 to 17-year-old kid. Right. I mean, it was a long time ago. But intrigue is the perfect word because it gives you a little taste when you watch it. Just flashes there where, ooh, okay, that was nice. Ooh, that was nice. Ooh, that was nice. He's got really good footwork, really good fundamentals. He's got a good arm, good accuracy, good athleticism. Not really bad at anything, but I don't know if he's great at anything. If he is, I just didn't see it enough on a consistent basis to say that's the one, put him in the group. And that's why he was graded where he was graded. He was outside the top 6 quarterbacks that all went in the top 12 picks. And went until 150, the longest gap in between before the next quarterback was selected. Put it this way. I understand why he lost his job to Caleb Williams at Oklahoma. In fact, it was one of the podcasts Caleb Williams was on. What did he say? He said something like he felt like he walked in day 1 knowing he was the best quarterback.
Yeah, he said I walked in knowing that I was the best, and I came to beat that guy out. And it's important to note that guy was the number 1 quarterback. He was the guy who was projected to go where Caleb went in this draft.
And let me just tell you something. Caleb was right, because Caleb just multiplies everything I said about Rattler being good, being great. Now, one thing I loved about Spencer Rattler, he was in an offense where he made full field progressions. He was a guy that has a natural feel for the middle of the field. My God, when I watch college football quarterbacks, it's the one thing that stands out. It's the inconsistency with seeing the middle of the field. And he worked the middle of the field really well. And he's a guy that has, like I said, has good footwork. And he was the only one that I felt like that I saw that was comfortable turning his back in play action, which is getting harder and harder to find in college football. He did it enough to where you at least feel somewhat comfortable about that. But I just don't know if he's great at any one thing. So where is the ceiling? Who knows? But I do know this. At pick 150, it's worth it because I don't know who else would have been the pick at 150, but I guarantee you this. They probably had a list of all their prospects right here, and way up here by himself was Rattler. It was like, this guy is such an outlier. We have to pick him. We have to pick him right here. And as Dennis Allen said, that pick just kept staring at us and staring at us and staring at us. I'll say this, calling it now. The Haener-Rattler battle is going to be fun to watch because I'm telling you, Haener is not giving that spot up. So it's going to be a really good competition for the backup quarterback spot, and I think both those guys are going to be on the roster. So Rattler gives me a lot of intrigue, and honestly, I'm here for it because there are certain things in training camp that can get a little monotonous. If there's a really good QB2 battle with a couple of names that you know, like Rattler and Haener, I think it's going to be fun to watch.
I didn't love the pick. I didn't love the pick because I think I agree with you that Rattler at 150 is a great pick. Great value.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a great pick for the New Orleans Saints.
Okay.
Who already had 5 quarterbacks in the room. I'll give everything you said. He has the tools, the arm strength, the big playability. He can do things in college that a lot of quarterbacks can't do. Mm-hmm. But we can't ignore that he did underachieve in his collegiate career. This is a guy who came into Oklahoma with the world in his hands. Mm-hmm. He was expected to be that number 1 quarterback, and a lot of teams needed quarterbacks high in this draft. He was expected initially to be one of those guys. It didn't happen. He got beat out by Caleb Williams. He went to South Carolina, played SEC football, and he didn't always stand out in the SEC. He wasn't always one of the top guys. Mm-hmm. Now, did he show flashes? Absolutely. But there's a reason why he was still there at 150. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why the last quarterback before he got picked was what, pick 12? Bo Nix?
Bo Nix, pick 12. Yep.
And then there were 138 picks in between, and everybody was looking at Spencer Rattler and said, we're going to pass up on that guy. So I do show a little bit of, pause there, like, okay, Rattler's interesting, but I'm not exactly sold on him as a prospect, but I do agree that this quarterback battle will be maybe even the one to watch in camp because what's important to keep in mind, the Saints last season said they like Jake Haener a lot. Mm-hmm. A lot of the coaches that said that probably are no longer in this building.
They're not here, right.
Jake Haener, I don't want to call it the previous regime because Dennis Allen's still the head coach, but a lot of the coaches that played a part in bringing in Jake Haener and were high on Jake Haener, they're no longer in New Orleans. Clint Kubiak's coming in, and he brought a lot of his guys with him. He had a lot of input on the new coaching system, and maybe they're not as high on Jake Haener right now. Maybe you can look at Spencer Rattler as a Kubiak guy. So you've got a Kubiak guy, you've got the guy who's already there and Jake Haener, and let's not underrate Jake Haener. He was the training camp MVP last year.
No doubt.
He was a guy we were watching in training camp, and a lot of people saw it and said, hey, man, he could beat out Jameis.
I know, he might push Jameis, right?
And now Jameis wound up winning the job in the preseason. The veteran instinct showed up. Jake Haener was up and down in the preseason, but just off training camp, Jake Haener was just as good for the New Orleans Saints as any other player on that team was. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see because a few months ago, we talked about when they signed Nathan Peterman, Jake Haener can beat out Nathan Peterman. Now you still got Kellen Mond in that room, someone else who Kubiak coached in Minnesota. So I think it'll be interesting to see who winds up getting taken to training camp. If I had to guess, I'd guess Peterman and Mond might be the odd guys out.
Yeah.
But if it does wind up being Haener versus Rattler, hey, I'm here for it.
I'm here for it. It just goes back to, man, that Kellen Mond signing was such a weird signing. It just really came from out of nowhere. After they already kind of had their veteran backup type in Peterman, but they brought Mond in. We'll see what happens. I don't think either one of those guys are going to be around for training camp. Man, you can't divide the reps up. I mean, I guess you can have 4 quarterbacks, but what are you going to do rep-wise? I mean, the practice is 2 hours, 15 minutes. It's hard to get all those reps in you. And those guys need reps, especially guys battling for the backup quarterback spot. And even Derek Carr in a new system, they need the reps. So rep distribution will be key. How they divvy it up will be key. But I think that group's going to really thin out by the time we get to training camp in Irvine, California. So if, let's just say they don't pick Rattler there, like, did you have a prospect that you saw that was like that would work out? Or
for me,
what did you think?
I just wanted somebody a little higher on your list of needs. I think you could have stood to get, they got an offensive tackle. Yeah. You could have gotten another one in that spot. I would have liked to see them go safety. I would have liked to see, now they did go receiver a few picks later with Bub Means, and at the time I was thinking they could have maybe win the receiver in that spot. I just didn't. If I were to list all of the Saints' needs in order, quarterback probably would have been one of the last 2 or 3 that I named. I didn't think you needed him unless, and we talked about this, unless he was a first-round guy, unless he was a guy who you could see stepping in to play that position this or next year in the near future. Do we see Spencer Rattler beating out Derek Carr in the near future?
That's a great question, and it was posed to DA, and he said he's got starter potential. So maybe they do see this as we talked about that scenario if one of the top guys slip into the second round. That's where you look because maybe that guy's got franchise material. Do they think this guy's got franchise material? I don't know. I mean, I think I don't go crazy with comparisons, but I heard it a lot and was the first name I thought of. In fact, me and my dad were texting back and forth after it happened. We both said the same name. Can he have like a Gardner Minshew type career? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Where like it's just kind of that really in between like spot starter, high end backup, but he can be successful with it. I don't know, but point of the matter is I just think at this point it was a value pick. I mean, you could have picked a receiver there, a tight end there. But they ended up going with Rattler, and I would love to know where exactly they had him graded because it's like a second-round grade. If it's a second-round grade,
then you got to take that guy.
If it's a high third-round grade, that's still incredible value. So we'll see. And honestly, he's going to be one of the ones I watch the most when it comes to training camp coming up, and even OTAs coming up here in a couple of weeks / months here. With the Saints. So, the Rattler situation is very intriguing.
And it's important to note, we haven't spoken to Kubiak, so we still don't know how they're going to use Taysom.
Yep.
Last year in training camp, Taysom did take quarterback reps as well as reps with the receivers and tight ends. So we're still not sure how Kubiak can use Taysom. That can play into this scenario as well. And as we progress through the draft, though, we talked about what we liked. We talked about what surprised us. What didn't we like? What areas do we feel like the Saints could have done a better job in executing in this NFL draft?
To me, all right, so I think you use a key word there, execution, because my problem is not necessarily with who they picked. It's where they ended up picking in this draft. I think the biggest mistake, the biggest disappointment, and, this is not for a lack of trying probably. We don't know what happened behind the scenes, but the fact that they were not able to fill that third and fourth round hole was extremely disappointing to me just because of the way the board laid out, what you had going in. The second round, they moved up 4 spots to get Kool-Aid. And look, we like to pick Kool-Aid, McKinstry. We've already said that. But could that have been a spot they could have moved back? Who knows? But they chose to move up. We already know they flirted with the idea of moving back at 14 to, if it was like 14 to 16 and they still had Fuanga or Fantano on the board, would that have been worth grabbing another third or fourth round pick? To me, it was so many good players that we spoke about on this podcast when I went through my mocks and just other players that we talked about that were taken in that third and fourth round gap that I believe could be day one contributors / starters that make an impact their rookie year, which is what this team absolutely needs. Here's the problem with the draft, okay? Draft class for the Saints. You can go one by one and draw your list of pros and cons and needs and wants and all that stuff. But the fact of the matter is simply this. Everyone you talk to about this draft, they said it dropped off significantly after, say, the top 100, 125 prospects.
Right.
So even if Spencer Rattler was within your top 100, 125, that's great. But you now have 5 selections from pick 150 on in a class where the talent falls off a cliff after the top 125 prospects. So I guess my point to you is all of those guys, you can make a case for it. But collectively, I have a hard time thinking all 4 of those guys or 5 of those guys are going to make the roster. We know Rattler's going to make the roster, but right. of the following 4, I like the Texas linebacker. He's probably going to be a special teams guy. I like Bub Means. He may have a chance. The other 2 guys, Christian Boyd and the tackle out of Eastern Kentucky, they're going to be fringe roster guys. So to me, if you could have filled that gap, 3rd or 4th round, and get a player you know is going to make the roster and or have a strong conviction that could contribute right away, that would have been great to get. And let's read off some of the players that were taken in that 3rd and 4th round gap.
Right.
Cooper Beebe, guard, Kansas State. Matt Goncalves, a guy I love, tackle out of Pitt. Blake Corum, running back out of Michigan. Dominic Puny, guard, Kansas. Jarian Jones, nickel, Florida State. Peyton Wilson, linebacker, NC State. Cameron Kitchen, safety out of Miami. I know we didn't discuss him, but I like this game. Jatavian Sanders, the tight end out of Texas. Layden Robinson, guard A&M. Javon Foster, tackle Missouri. Torrey Taylor.
Yep.
I told you.
Yep.
I said there's some people saying 7th round's too low, and turns out he got picked in round 4. Sione Vake, one of my favorites. And, of course, my favorite player in one of my mock drafts, Jared Wiley, tight end out of TCU. We're all taking in that gap. You're telling me if the Saints could have landed one of those players, I would have felt so much better about this class as a whole. Now I'm just kind of a little bit of a mixed bag class, but if they could have done that, I would have felt much better about this class.
I agree. I wrote down 2 things. That was one of the things. They failed to move into that gap in the 3rd and 4th round. The second thing is, and I mentioned it a few minutes ago, I think that they could have done a better job addressing their needs. If I were to just rank the Saints' needs from top to bottom, I'd say coming into the draft, you've got your offensive line, you've got defensive tackle, you've got safety, tight end, wide receiver, edge rusher, quarterback, running back, corner. And honestly, you could probably move running back a little higher off that list. Quarterback and corner were 2 of their first 5 picks. When I'm thinking you're coming into the draft, you're coming into a draft where you need to get better as a team and fill needs. And I don't know, outside of their number 1 pick, they did a great job with their number 1 pick. I don't know if they did a great job with the rest of their draft in doing that. You look at DT, the second thing I named. You've got Brian Brzee, but after Brian Brzee, you've got Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard from last year, 2 guys that you brought in as veterans, but are they going to be your starters? Are they going to be in the rotation for the next few years? Probably not. Safety, you lost Marcus May, so you've got a lot of faith in Jordan Howden, but unless you're going to move Alontae Taylor to safety or something like that, then there's not a lot of competition at that safety position right now. Wide receiver, you've got Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed's going to be in the mix, but you don't have a bona fide number 3 yet. And there were some guys who you could have potentially taken in that 2nd round when you took Kool-Aid McKinstry, maybe, who could have filled that spot. They had a lot of receivers that were falling in that 2nd round, a lot of guys trading up to get receivers in that 2nd round. Edge rusher, I'm fine with them not taking an edge. We talked about how stacked that room is, but quarterback, cornerback with 2 of their first 3 picks. I know they like the guys that they got a lot. I understand they were high on their list, but I don't think that was necessarily the priority if you're talking need. But that's really the only, that and them not moving into the 3rd and 4th is really the only criticism.
When you really put it like that, it kind of puts in perspective. 2 of their first 3 was a corner and a quarterback when they didn't.
Right.
It wasn't in the top 3 or 4 when it came to need, and there were other prospects available at that time. But again, would things have been different had that board been a little more balanced, a little more like to take 1 or 2 less 5th round picks, which I guess they sacrificed the 5th and the 6th to go up in the 2nd round, to have 1 more pick in that middle of the draft. I just think it would have made all the difference in the world in a class where, like I said, certainly felt like it was top heavy until about that 4th round. Honestly, for me, I saw the PFF A+ grade on the Saints draft class. Look, I know the Saints probably love that. I just can't get with that right now. I can't. I can't get. Look, I love Fuanga, and I understand that they feel the need, so that pick was an A+. But if I were rating the totality of this class, I think you got a day 1 starter that could be a foundational piece. I love Kool-Aid McKinstry. I think he's going to be a player for us, for the Saints. And then Spencer Rattler is a guy that provides a little intrigue, but the rest, they're not all going to make the roster. So I settled in at a B-. Hopefully they surprise me on the back end. But I think even they said, because DA came out and said, when you pick this part of the draft, you really talk about guys, developmental guys, depth guys, and guys either battling for the back end of the roster or practice squad. You're basically calling it what they are at that point. I thought it was I don't think he meant it that way, but I thought it was a pretty open admission of who realistically these players are that they grabbed at this stage of the draft.
I agree. I was thinking maybe a C or a C+. Now, if Marshawn gets traded and Kool-Aid steps into a bigger role, I'm willing to go up to about a B. But as the draft stands right now, and I'm grading it in its totality, your failure to move into the 3rd and 4th rounds, your failure to necessarily prioritize your needs outside of offensive tackle, that's what's leading into my C+ grade. But overall, the number 1 thing, if we're looking for the silver lining, the number 1 thing that you could say the Saints needed to do coming into this draft, get a starting caliber offensive lineman to shore up the most questionable part of their team. They did manage to do that, so I got to give them credit.
Yeah, and look, I felt like the draft kind of fell in line with the whole kind of off-season theme of you know, like they made moves in free agency, but it wasn't like wow moves. They made moves in the draft, and they had the stunner with Rattler. But I mean, kind of like just even keel kind of draft off season. I think they're slightly better with their additions when you add free agency and the draft on the roster right now. I don't know if they're I don't know how much better, and they're going to have a much tougher schedule, so who knows if at least they're a better record. But nonetheless, it's been an interesting part of the process, and all that pre-draft work is officially done. Anything else for us today while we wrap this up?
We'll ask one final word question, questions that have been submitted to us through the Final Word app. Brandy from Marrero asks, good old Marrero, what positional battle are you looking forward to the most as we head into camp?
Well, that's a good one. I want to see how the wide receiver room sorts itself out. Kind of already said I love the backup quarterback position, but I want to see the entire offense with the new system as well. And then, you know, let's see how the cornerbacks do. There's a lot of talent in that cornerback room as well. So I mean, actual position, I would go wide receiver. I would go backup quarterback, and then we got to figure out who this one of the tackles, or either the left tackle or left guard is going to be. Whoever that is, whoever competes for that's going to be the most important competition at camp.
I agree. I wrote down wide receiver as number one because I think you've got a new offensive coordinator coming in, and it's exciting. And the wide receiver 3 spot, and you could even argue maybe the wide receiver 2 spot, are wide open to win. Really, anything under Olave, so that'll be fun. The cornerback spot, assuming that Lattimore, stays and doesn't get traded, you're going to have an interesting 3-way between Adebo, Kool-Aid, and Alante, and that offensive tackle spot. We know that Fuanga's going to take one. Is Trevor Penning going to wind up being your guy on the other side? Does Ali Udo maybe push for that, position? He did play with Kubiak in the past. So I think seeing how that offensive line, which is still their weakest position, is going to wind up shaping out, that's something I'm going to be watching a lot going into camp.
Should be fun, and the good news is on-field work starts next month. I know rookie minicamp is coming up. It says this week or maybe next week, and then they have OTAs into late May into June, and then the July break, and then they kick back off for training camp in late July. Man, this 2024 is flying by. But the draft is over. Those were our grades. Those were our thoughts, and I think it's going to be a good week this week. How about you?
It'll depend what the Pelicans do tonight. Let's see if the Pelicans can avoid the brooms tonight, and then we'll see how the week goes.
All right, we'll see how the week goes. That'll do it for us, though, for now. For Andre Johnson Jr., I am Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.